A dying Comanche warrior cursed his broken arrow with his final breath. And for generations, everyone who possessed it would pay the ultimate price. In the vast expanse of the southern plains, where the Comanche people rode like lords of the wind across endless grasslands, there lived a young warrior named Iukli whose name meant he who seeks revenge. But Iukli had not been born with vengeance in his heart. That darkness had been carved into his soul by a betrayal so profound that it would ultimately corrupt not just his own spirit, but the very weapon he carried into his final battle. Iukli was the youngest son of Chief Mukwu, leader of a Comanche band that had prospered for generations through their mastery of horsemanship and their skill in both hunting and warfare. The young warrior had grown up believing in the sacred codes that governed his people: loyalty to the band, respect for elders, protection of the weak, and above all, the unbreakable bond of trust between warriors who rode together into danger. It was this last principle that would prove to be Iukli's downfall, for he trusted completely in his older brother Nakoni, whose name meant wanderer. Nakoni was everything that Iukli aspired to be: tall, strong, skilled with weapons, and blessed with a kind of natural leadership that made other warriors eager to follow him into battle. The brothers had always been close, despite the 5-year difference in their ages. Nakoni had taught Iukli to ride before he could properly walk, had shown him how to make arrows that flew straight and true, and had protected him from the teasing of older boys when Iukli's small size made him an easy target for mockery. But as the years passed and both brothers reached adulthood, something began to change in their relationship. Nakoni, as the elder son, was expected to eventually succeed their father as chief. But Iukli's natural gifts, his intelligence, his courage, and most importantly, his absolute integrity, began to attract the attention and respect of the band's warriors in ways that made Nakoni increasingly uncomfortable. The tension between the brothers came to a head during the summer, when Iukli turned 21 and Nakoni 26. A rival band of Kiowa warriors had been raiding Comanche territory, stealing horses and threatening the safety of isolated hunting parties. Chief Mukwu decided that a strong response was necessary, and he began planning a major war expedition to drive the Kiowa back across the Arkansas River. Tradition demanded that Nakoni, as the eldest son, should lead this war party. But privately, many of the warriors had begun to express doubts about his leadership abilities. Nakoni was brave enough, but he was also impulsive and sometimes careless with the lives of those who followed him. Iukli, on the other hand, had already demonstrated both tactical brilliance and genuine concern for the welfare of his fellow warriors. The debate came to a head during a council meeting where the details of the expedition were being planned. When several respected warriors openly suggested that Iukli should lead the war party instead of Nakoni, the elder brother's face flushed with humiliation and rage. "I am the firstborn son of Chief Mukwu," Nakoni declared, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Leadership of this expedition is mine by right of birth." "Birth gives you the right to be considered for leadership," replied Pahetu, an old warrior whose opinion carried great weight among the band. "But the safety of our young men demands that we choose the leader most likely to bring them home alive." The debate continued for hours, with opinion clearly divided between those who supported traditional succession and those who believed merit should determine leadership. In the end, Chief Mukwu made the decision that he hoped would preserve both his family's unity and the safety of his warriors. "Nakoni will lead the expedition," the chief announced, "but Iukli will serve as his second-in-command and primary strategist. The success of this venture will depend on both my sons working together." It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but it seemed to offer the best chance of success. What Chief Mukwu could not have known was that his decision had planted the seeds of a hatred in Nakoni's heart that would ultimately destroy not just his relationship with his brother, but his own soul as well. The war party set out 3 days later, consisting of 30 of the band's finest warriors, all mounted on the swift ponies that made Comanche cavalry the terror of the southern plains. The plan that Iukli had developed was elegant in its simplicity. They would approach the Kiowa camp from 3 directions simultaneously, creating confusion and preventing escape while minimizing casualties on both sides. For the first several days of the expedition, everything proceeded according to plan. The war party made good time across the prairie, located the Kiowa camp without being detected, and positioned themselves for the coordinated attack that Iukli had designed. But on the night before the assault was scheduled to begin, Nakoni made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. Consumed by jealousy and desperate to prove his worth as a leader, Nakoni decided to abandon Ayakli's careful strategy in favor of a direct frontal assault that he hoped would bring him personal glory. Without consulting his brother or any of the other senior warriors, Nakoni gathered a group of young, impetuous fighters and led them in a premature attack on the Kiowa camp. The attack was a disaster. The Kiowa warriors, alerted by the noise of Nakoni's poorly coordinated assault, had time to organize their defenses and mount a devastating counterattack. Within minutes, half of Nakoni's force was dead or wounded, and the survivors were in full retreat. Ayakli, awakened by the sounds of battle, immediately realized what had happened. Abandoning the carefully planned strategy that was now useless, he led the remaining warriors in a desperate rescue attempt, fighting his way through superior numbers to reach his brother and the few men still alive from the original assault force. The rescue succeeded, but at a terrible cost. Ayakli himself took 3 arrows during the fighting, one in his shoulder, one in his thigh, and one that pierced his chest just below the heart. As he helped load the wounded onto horses to retreat, he could feel his life bleeding away with each labored breath. It was during this retreat that Nakoni made the second decision that would damn his soul forever. Seeing that his brother was dying from wounds received while saving him from his own folly, and knowing that Ayakli's death would leave him alone to face the judgment of the band, Nakoni chose to compound his original betrayal with one even more heinous. When the war party made camp that evening to tend to their wounded, Nakoni approached his dying brother with what appeared to be brotherly concern. "Ayakli," he said, kneeling beside the buffalo robe where his brother lay struggling for breath, "I am sorry. My pride and jealousy led me to make a terrible mistake." Ayakli, despite his agony, managed to smile at his brother with genuine forgiveness. "We are still brothers," he whispered. "Brothers make mistakes, but they also forgive each other." It was then that Nakoni revealed the depth of his corruption. "The band will blame me for this disaster," he said quietly. "They will say that I was unfit to lead, that I got good men killed through my arrogance." "Tell them the truth," Ayakli replied weakly. "Accept responsibility for your mistakes. The band values honesty above all else." But Nakoni had already decided on a different course of action. "Or," he said, his voice taking on a cold, calculating tone, "I could tell them that you were the one who insisted on the frontal assault, that you overruled my careful planning and led the attack yourself. Who would contradict me? All the men who participated in the assault are dead except for 2, and they were unconscious when the key decisions were made." Ayakli stared at his brother in shock, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You would lie about what happened? You would blame me for your own failures." "I would tell the story that needs to be told," Nakoni replied coldly. "The story that preserves my ability to lead our people." "But I am dying," Ayakli gasped. "Why does it matter what story you tell?" "Because," Nakoni said with brutal honesty, "a dead hero can take the blame for anything, while a living failure must face the consequences of his actions." With those words, Nakoni reached for the quiver that lay beside his dying brother. Among the arrows it contained was one that Ayakli had crafted himself, a masterwork of flint and wood and feather that had never missed its target. It was this arrow that Nakoni took, snapping it in half with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the entire camp. "What are you doing?" Ayakli asked in horror. "Creating evidence," Nakoni replied matter-of-factly. "This broken arrow will be proof of how fiercely you fought, how desperately you tried to achieve victory even when your reckless strategy was clearly failing." As Ayakli watched his brother destroy the arrow he had crafted with such care, something broke inside him that went far deeper than the physical wounds that were ending his life. The betrayal was so complete, so fundamentally evil, that it seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of reality itself. "Brother," Ayakli whispered, his voice carrying a weight that made Nakoni step back in alarm, "you have chosen dishonor over truth, blame over responsibility, personal gain over justice. But you will not escape the consequences of what you have done." Ayakli reached out and grasped the broken pieces of his arrow, his blood flowing over the splintered wood and shattered flint. "With my dying breath," he continued, his voice growing stronger as his life force gathered itself for one final effort, "I place a curse upon this arrow and upon all who possess it. Let it carry the weight of your betrayal through all the generations to come. Let it bring death and sorrow to every hand that holds it, until justice is finally served and truth is acknowledged. Nakoni laughed nervously, trying to dismiss his brother's words as a delirium of a dying man. Curses are superstition, brother, he said. In the morning, I will bury you with honor, and this arrow will be burned with your other possessions as custom demands. But even as he spoke, Nakoni could feel something cold and dark settling around the broken weapon, as if Ayukli's words had given form to forces that existed beyond the physical world. Ayukli died before dawn, taking with him the truth of what had really happened during the disastrous raid. Nakoni told his version of events exactly as he had planned, painting his dead brother as a brave but reckless warrior whose tactical mistakes had led to the deaths of good men. The story was accepted, partly because no one wanted to believe that Nakoni could be capable of such deception, but mostly because Ayukli was no longer alive to contradict it. Nakoni was praised for his efforts to save his brother and mourned as a warrior who had lost his closest companion to the tragic consequences of pride and inexperience. But Nakoni made one crucial mistake in his deception. Instead of burning the broken arrow with Ayukli's other possessions as custom demanded, he secretly kept it as a kind of trophy, proof of his ability to escape the consequences of his own failures. The curse began to manifest itself almost immediately. Within a month of returning to the band, Nakoni's favorite horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and broke its leg, forcing him to kill the animal he had ridden since childhood. His hunting luck, which had always been reliable, suddenly turned sour. Arrows that should have struck their target sailed wide, and animals that should have been easy prey seemed to sense his approach from impossible distances. Worse still, Nakoni began to experience nightmares in which his dead brother appeared to him, not with forgiveness or understanding, but with eyes that burned with the fire of absolute justice. The arrow remembers. Ayukli would say in these dreams, it remembers the truth you tried to bury, and it will not rest until that truth is known. But even as these misfortunes accumulated, Nakoni refused to acknowledge any connection between his troubles and the cursed weapon he kept hidden in his lodge. His pride would not allow him to admit that his brother's dying words might have had power beyond the grave. The curse claimed its first victim during the winter of Nakoni's 28th year. A rival warrior named Tachi, who had always been jealous of Nakoni's position as heir to the chieftainship, discovered the broken arrow while searching through Nakoni's possessions during a buffalo hunt, recognizing it as a weapon that had supposedly belonged to the heroic Ayukli. Tachi stole it, planning to claim that he had found it on the battlefield and deserved the honor of owning such a sacred relic. Within days of taking possession of the arrow, Tachi's own luck turned dramatically for the worse. His horse threw him during a hunt, breaking his arm. A fever struck his lodge, killing his youngest daughter. Most devastating of all, he began to experience the same nightmares that had been tormenting Nakoni. Visions of Ayukli's accusing spirit demanding justice for the lies that had been told about his death. Desperate to escape the misfortune that seemed to follow the broken arrow, Tachi tried to return it to Nakoni. But Nakoni, who had been experiencing a brief respite from his own curse-related troubles, refused to take the weapon back. If you stole it, the consequences are yours to bear, Nakoni said coldly. Tachi's fear and desperation led him to make a decision that would spread the curse far beyond the Comanche band. Unable to return the arrow to Nakoni and unwilling to keep it himself, he traded it to a Mexican merchant in exchange for a rifle and ammunition. The merchant, unaware of the weapon's dark history, saw only an interesting example of Comanche craftsmanship that might be valuable collectors of Indian artifacts. He carried the broken arrow south into Mexico, where he eventually sold it to a wealthy hacendato, who displayed it in his study as a conversation piece. The hacendato's name was Don Carlos Villarreal, and he was a man who prided himself on his collection of weapons and artifacts from the various Indian tribes that had once roamed freely across the lands he now claimed as his own. The broken Comanche arrow took its place among spears, tomahawks, and other implements of warfare that Don Carlos had acquired through trade, purchase, or simple theft. But the curse that Ayukli had placed upon the weapon cared nothing for changes in ownership or geography. Within weeks of the arrow's arrival at the hacienda, misfortune began to plague the Villarreal family. The hacendato's prize bull sickened and died for no apparent reason. Bandits raided his northern pastures, stealing cattle and horses that represented years of careful breeding. Most tragically, his eldest son was thrown from a horse and trampled to death in an accident that witnesses described as completely unpredictable and unavoidable. As these disasters accumulated, Don Carlos began to hear stories from his Indian servants about cursed objects and the power of dying warriors to influence events beyond the grave. At first, he dismissed such tales as superstition, but as the misfortunes continued to mount, he began to wonder if there might be truth in the old beliefs. The final confirmation came when the Hacendato began to experience dreams in which a wounded Comanche warrior appeared to him, speaking words that Don Carlos could not understand but whose meaning seemed to burn itself directly into his consciousness. Return what was stolen. Acknowledge what was hidden. Let truth be known. Terrified by these supernatural visitations and convinced that the broken arrow was somehow responsible for his family's misfortunes, Don Carlos made arrangements to return the weapon to Comanche territory. But rather than making the dangerous journey himself, he entrusted the task to a group of Texas Rangers who were heading north on patrol. The Rangers, hardened men who had little patience for what they considered Mexican superstition, accepted the task largely as a favor to Don Carlos, who had provided them with valuable intelligence about bandit activities in the past. They carried the broken arrow north without ceremony, planning to leave it at the first Indian reservation they encountered. But the curse followed them just as it had followed all the previous owners. During their journey north, the Rangers encountered a band of Kiowa warriors who attacked their camp at dawn. In the fighting that followed, 3 Rangers were killed and 2 more wounded, including the sergeant who had been carrying the broken arrow. As he lay dying from a Kiowa lance wound, Sergeant Tom Mackenzie pressed the cursed weapon into the hands of the one unwounded survivor, a young ranger named Billy Crockett. "Get rid of this thing," Mackenzie gasped with his final breath. "There's something evil about it. Every man who's carried it has died bad." Billy Crockett, despite his youth, was experienced enough in frontier life to respect warnings about cursed objects. As soon as he reached the nearest settlement, he sought out someone who might know how to properly dispose of an Indian artifact that seemed to bring death to anyone who possessed it. The person he found was Father Miguel Santos, a Franciscan missionary who had spent decades working among the various Indian tribes of the Southwest. Father Santos had heard many stories about cursed weapons and haunted artifacts, and he listened carefully as Billy described the broken arrow's deadly history. "This is no ordinary curse," the priest said after examining the weapon and hearing Billy's account. "This has the feel of genuine spiritual power behind it. A dying man's call for justice that has taken on a life of its own. Can you destroy it?" Billy asked hopefully. "I could try," Father Santos replied, "but I suspect that burning or burying this arrow would only relocate the curse, not end it. Curses born of injustice can only be broken by justice itself." "What kind of justice?" "The truth," the priest said simply. "Whatever lies were told about this arrow's original owner must be acknowledged and corrected. Only then will his spirit find peace, and only then will the curse be lifted." But uncovering a truth that had been buried for years among people who had no written records and whose oral traditions might have been corrupted by self-interest proved to be an impossible task. Billy Crockett lacked the knowledge, resources, and cultural connections necessary to investigate Comanche tribal history. In the end, Father Santos decided to keep the broken arrow in his mission church, hoping that the sacred environment might contain its influence while he tried to research its origins. For several years, this strategy seemed to work. The curse appeared to go dormant, causing no obvious harm to the priest or his parishioners. But the peace was temporary. When Father Santos died of fever in 1847, the broken arrow passed to his successor, Father Antonio Ramirez, who knew nothing of its history or the precautions that his predecessor had taken. Father Ramirez saw only an interesting artifact that might be useful for teaching his congregation about the need to bring Christianity to the heathen tribes. He began using the broken arrow as a prop in sermons about the violence and spiritual darkness that characterized Indian culture before the arrival of European civilization. The irony of using a weapon that embodied the consequences of betrayal and dishonesty to illustrate moral lessons was lost on Father Ramirez, but it was not lost on the spiritual forces that governed the curse. Within months, misfortune struck the mission with devastating force. A plague of locusts destroyed the crops that fed the community. Flash floods washed away buildings that had stood for decades. Most devastating of all, a band of Apache raiders attacked the mission, killing Father Ramirez and several members of his congregation. The broken arrow disappeared during the Apache raid, taken by warriors who saw it as a useful addition to their own arsenal. But they soon discovered, as had all the previous owners, that the weapon brought more harm than benefit to those who possessed it. The curse followed the arrow as it passed from hand to hand among the Apache, each new owner experiencing the same pattern of misfortune and supernatural visitations that had plagued everyone who had touched the weapon since Nakoni first broke it in half. Some owners tried to destroy the arrow, only to find that axes would not cut the wood, fire would not burn the feathers, and hammers would not shatter the flint point. Others attempted to trade it away or give it as gifts, only to discover that it had a way of returning to them at the most inconvenient moments. The arrow's reputation as a cursed object gradually spread throughout the Apache bands, and eventually, no one was willing to keep it for any length of time. It became a kind of supernatural hot potato, passed quickly from person to person, as each new owner sought to escape its malevolent influence. It was during this period of rapid ownership changes that the broken arrow came to the attention of Geronimo, the famous Apache war leader whose resistance to American expansion had made him a legend among all the southwestern tribes. Geronimo was himself a powerful medicine man, and he recognized immediately that the broken arrow carried genuine spiritual force. But unlike the previous owners, who had seen only the weapon's capacity for causing harm, Geronimo understood that curses born of injustice could sometimes be redirected toward more appropriate targets. This arrow seeks justice for a betrayed warrior. Geronimo told his followers after examining the weapon and listening to the stories that surrounded it. Perhaps we can help it find what it seeks. Under Geronimo's guidance, Apache medicine men performed ceremonies designed to communicate with the spirit that inhabited the broken arrow. Through visions and dreams, they learned the true story of Iuckley's death and Nakoni's betrayal, information that had been lost or distorted through years of oral transmission. The revelation of the truth provided temporary peace for Iuckley's restless spirit, but it did not end the curse. Justice, the Apache shamans realized, required more than just acknowledgement of what had happened. It required consequences for those who had perpetrated and perpetuated the original injustice. Nakoni himself was long dead by this time, having succumbed to a mysterious wasting illness that the tribal medicine men had been unable to cure. But his descendants still live among the Comanche, and some of them continue to honor the false story of Iuckley's death that Nakoni had created to protect his own reputation. Geronimo made it his mission to ensure that the true story reached the Comanche bands, sending messengers to inform them of what his shamans had learned about the circumstances of Iuckley's death. The revelation caused a scandal among the Comanche, who had honored Nakoni as a hero and blamed Iuckley for the disaster that had befallen the war party. The tribal council formally acknowledged their error and performed ceremonies to honor Iuckley's memory while condemning Nakoni's betrayal. But even this official recognition was not enough to fully appease the spirit that inhabited the broken arrow. Justice is not just about setting the record straight. Geronimo explained to his fellow Apache leaders. It is about ensuring that the consequences of betrayal extend to all who benefit from lies. The curse, as if responding to this deeper understanding of its purpose, began to target not just the arrow's immediate owners, but anyone who had gained advantage through deception or betrayal. The weapon became a kind of supernatural instrument of justice, seeking out those who had escaped earthly consequences for their dishonesty. This new phase of the curse proved to be far more dangerous than anything that had come before. The broken arrow began to appear in possession of corrupt Indian agents who cheated tribes out of their allotted supplies, dishonest traders who sold inferior goods at inflated prices, and military officers who broke treaties for personal gain. In each case, the arrow's appearance was followed by a series of misfortunes that seemed specifically designed to expose and punish the target's particular form of corruption. Cheating agents would find their own supplies mysteriously spoiled or stolen. Dishonest traders would lose their goods to accidents or thefts that seemed to target them alone. Treaty-breaking officers would face unexpected disasters during crucial military campaigns. Word of the arrow's supernatural properties spread throughout the frontier, creating a legend that served as a deterrent to potential wrongdoers. Even those who didn't believe in curses found themselves hesitating before engaging in acts of betrayal or dishonesty, unwilling to risk becoming the next target of what newspapers began calling the Apache's revenge. But the curse was not limited to punishing white settlers and government officials. It also began to target Indians who had compromised their own principles for personal gain. Tribal leaders who had sold their people's interests for money or favors from white authorities found themselves facing the same kind of supernatural retribution that had befallen corrupt officials. This expansion of the curse's targets created a complex web of fear and suspicion throughout the frontier regions. People began to see the hand of supernatural justice in every unexpected misfortune, every sudden reversal of fortune, every coincidental exposure of hidden corruption. The broken arrow itself became the subject of intense speculation and research. Collectors of Indian artifacts offered enormous sums for the chance to possess such a famous cursed object, while scholars and journalists tried to track down its history and verify the stories that surrounded it. But the arrow seemed to have a will of its own when it came to choosing owners. It would disappear from locked collections and secure storage facilities, only to turn up in possession of someone whose actions had attracted the attention of its supernatural sense of justice. This pattern continued well into the 20th century, as the broken arrow adapted to new forms of betrayal and corruption. It appeared in the hands of politicians who broke campaign promises, business leaders who cheated their partners, and even religious figures who betrayed the trust of their congregations. Each new owner experienced the same progression of supernatural warnings and escalating misfortunes that had characterized the curse from its beginning. Dreams of Ayakli's spirit demanding justice, unexplained accidents and illnesses, the gradual erosion of everything the owner valued most. Some owners tried to break the curse through religious ceremonies or magical rituals, but these efforts invariably failed. Others attempted to hide the arrow or keep its presence secret, only to find that concealment only intensified the supernatural persecution they faced. The only consistent pattern that researchers could identify was that the curse seemed to lift when an owner genuinely acknowledged their wrongdoing and made sincere efforts to correct the harm they had caused. But such genuine repentance was rare, and most owners chose to pass the arrow along to someone else rather than face the difficult process of making amends for their actions. As the 21st century began, the broken arrow's legend had evolved into a modern myth that reflected contemporary concerns about justice, accountability, and the consequences of betrayal. Stories about the cursed weapon appeared on internet forums, in urban legend collections, and in documentary films about supernatural phenomena. But for all the attention it received, the arrow itself remained as elusive and unpredictable as ever. It continued to appear in the possession of those whose actions echoed the original betrayal that had created the curse, serving as a reminder that some forms of injustice carry consequences that extend far beyond the immediate circumstances of their commission. The most recent verified sighting of the broken arrow occurred in 2019, when it was found among the possessions of a corrupt corporate executive who had been embezzling funds from a Native American casino. The executive died in a single-car accident while driving to a meeting where he planned to confess his crimes and return the stolen money. The arrow disappeared from the crash site before investigators could catalog it as evidence, leading to renewed speculation about its current whereabouts and its next target. Those who study the legend of the broken arrow note that it serves as more than just a supernatural cautionary tale. It represents the enduring power of truth to assert itself even when those in positions of authority try to suppress it. The curse embodies the principle that justice may be delayed, but it cannot be permanently denied. And perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that the consequences of betrayal extend far beyond the immediate participants. Nakoni's decision to betray his dying brother created ripples of supernatural retribution that continued to spread for over a century and a half, affecting countless individuals who thought themselves safe from the consequences of their own moral compromises. This is the way of the warrior spirit. This is the way of the Comanche. And this is how one act of betrayal became a curse that continues to seek justice in a world where truth is often sacrificed for convenience, and where the price of dishonor may be paid by generations yet to come.